I'm a 21-year-old male. It was July 4th of 2019, and I live in Kansas in the USA. At the time, I worked as a corrections officer at a maximum security prison on the night shift. The cell house that I was in charge of was the maximum general population, 1 man to a cell, and this is where all the bad guys were held, and overall, the worst of society were housed here. Before work, I was doing the typical American 4th of July thing, grilling, blowing up fireworks, had a beer or two, having a great time with my now wife and family as well. My wife kept telling me that I needed to just call in sick and take the day without pay. I said no because, well, we're a little behind on bills. But boy, do I really wish that I'd listened to her now. As the night went on, it came time for us to leave my mum's and for me to go home and get ready for work. I took my wife home and dropped her off, got ready, and I left for work. My wife's car was actually broken, so she was stuck at home for the night. As I drove to work, which was about an hour's drive away, I watched the fireworks going off all around. It was kind of sad as well because I never had to work on the 4th before. This was a first. But after I got to work and got all my equipment, I got into my cell house. Business as usual, inmates were showered and locked up. I got my night cleaning crew out so they could clean the rest of the cell house and met up with my partner for the night in the officer station to get our briefing from the last shift. Fast forward an hour into our shift. It's now right around 12:30. Another officer came into the cell house, so now there's 3 of us. This happened often on night shift as there was nothing to do except rounds every half an hour or so. When out of nowhere, we hear an inmate laughing like a witch, like a cackle. That was strange, but nothing to be alarmed with. Drugs were a huge problem in this facility. Still is, in fact, as far as I know. But eventually, after a few more cackles, I decided to go and see what was making the sound in case they were high or something. I walked through and checked all 200 inmates, and nothing. There were a small few that were even awake, so I just kind of brushed it off and I just went back to my office. My partner and the other officer were asking if there was anyone that needed their cells searched. I couldn't think of anyone in particular that I suspected of having anything, so I went and checked all the cells again to see if I could get a whiff of smoke or see something. And as I was walking on the second-story cell run, I found an inmate that was acting really weird. He was in his bed facing the wall, just talking. This was kind of common too, as there are a lot of inmates with minor mental health issues. I figured that he must have been high because he turned and looked at me and told me to F off. I was going to leave him alone, but the disrespect made me kind of change my mind. And the time is now 12:40, July 5th. I walk back to the office and tell the other 2 officers which cell that he was in and I wanted him searched, cell 218. So, how the cell house is laid out is there are 100 cells per level. But from the officer station you can see the north side, first and second floor, but you can't see the south side unless you walk the 50 feet over it. Picture the movie Shawshank Redemption type cell house, except instead of being able to look through and see the cells across, you just see a wall. The cells are literally back to back. So, as the officers go to pull him out of his cell to search it, I went to the ground floor and was watching from below. Reason why? I wanted to get the inmate on the ground level and not the second floor. All that was there for protection from going over the edge was a handrail, and I noticed the inmate was taking forever to get out of his cell. He came out in shorts and a do-rag, which is weird because he wasn't fully clothed, didn't even put on sandals, just shorts and a do-rag, yet took 5 minutes to get out. And that made me really nervous. The inmate was a 6-foot-tall, 250-pound, muscle-bound dude too. Definitely had size on us. So from the ground, I holler at him and tell him to come down to the ground and that he could use the phone or check his email or commissary or something. And he declined my offer, which never happens. I knew something was up at that point. He was watching them search his cell from the control panel box, and this was alarming. They were in his cell and I was on the ground. He could have easily ambushed them, and he would have made it to them before I could get up the stairs. So, to try and keep them safe, I went upstairs to the inmate. He was standing in the corner away against the handrails at the top of the stairs. He knew that I was the OIC, officer in charge of that cell house, and he knew that I was the one that saw him talking to himself, and he asked me why I was having his cell searched. I lied and I said, it's nothing personal, man. I have a quota that I have to fill for cells searched in a night, and you were awake, so I just chose you to have it searched. It'll just take a second, don't worry. He was uneasy. He was pacing. Something just wasn't right. And then I saw it. He had turned just right, and I saw in his do-rag the Samsung logo reflecting the cell house light. Shit. I knew that there was going to be a problem as soon as I saw it, because he had a cell phone. I called over the radio for 2 additional officers to come to me. The inmate didn't seem to notice that I made the call. My supervisors responded saying 2 of them were on their way. Side note too, that at this time, only segregation officers had protective vests. So, out of the 5 of us that were now in there, only 1 had a vest. And I was not one of them. The officers there were South, he had a vest, McCormick, Collins, Sheffield, and me. The time is now 12:58, and as soon as South and McCormick got up to me, I told the inmate to turn around and to cuff up. South and McCormick were on the inmate's right side, I was in front of him, and he said, "Why?" angrily. I refused to give him a reason at first, and after a few minutes I had had enough. So I told him, "Look man, I can see the cell phone in your do-rag. You know you're not supposed to have that." The inmate then gets a defeated look on his face, but then fire in his eyes. His body relaxes and he slowly reaches up to retrieve the phone. But does he pull out a phone? No. He pulls out a 6-inch sharpened metal rod with ripped fabric wrapped around the bottom of the handle. Everything froze for me. I knew right then that I was about to die. Everything starts moving again, and I now have an inmate twice my size, charging and thrusting quickly and repeatedly towards me. I immediately went into defensive mode, trying to grab his arm and disarm him. His wrist kept slipping, and I couldn't keep a hold of it, but at the very least, I thankfully managed to block his attempts at my lower abdomen. Suddenly, though, he aimed high and went for my chest. I felt it make contact too, and I had just been stabbed in the right part of my chest. I yelled, "Spray him," at the top of my lungs. McCormick was already working on it. For those who don't understand, MK9 comes as a pressured spray bottle, about 20 ounces I think, and you can buy it at a camping store in the US, and it's called bear spray. It's the stuff that you spray in bears' eyes so that you can get away. South had come up behind the inmate and grabbed him around his chest and pulled him backwards, right as McCormick sprayed. I didn't realize it at the time, but the spray actually hit me, the inmate, and South, as well as everyone near us. I was able to turn and run, and I ran around the stair railing, past the panel box, and out onto the run of the cells on the 2nd story. I ran past a few cells and turned around to see that he wasn't chasing me, but South was wrestling him onto the ground while gagging on the OC, as was I and McCormick. Sheffield, having heard the commotion, came running out of the cell, saw what was happening, and ran in to help. The inmate, though, grabbed South by the vest and tried to throw him over the end of the landing, but South dropped to his knees before he went over. I grabbed my shoulder mic and I screamed into it, a level A response to "Charlie, now." The dispatch said something back, but I didn't hear it. I started to charge back to help save South, but before I could get away from the cell, I was in front of Collins and he grabbed me from behind and told me to not go. Due to the layout of the runs, I didn't see, but Sheffield grabbed the inmate from behind and body slammed him on his face, and thankfully, he began to cuff him. Sheffield got covered in OC as well, due to the inmate being covered in it, and as soon as Collins let me go, I stood still and I watched. Up the stairs came 4 more officers, the captain and a lieutenant. The lieutenant came and asked me what happened, and I started to explain, but he cut me off after he saw blood coming out of my left arm. After taking me out of the cell house, he made me lift my shirt because he saw the blood. He examined all my wounds, and he had to remove all of my equipment and hold paper towels to my arm. I was rushed to the ER, and I was able to grab my phone out of my rental car. I had actually totaled my car a few weeks prior by hitting a deer. I called my wife and I told her what happened, and she called my parents and siblings. Luckily, my injuries weren't too bad. I was stabbed 4 times, once on my left arm just below the elbow. That was through and through. Blade went into one side and out the other, twice in the top of my left hand, and the one that hit my chest went into my skin but hit one of my ribs, keeping it out of my lungs, thankfully. And after 37 plunges, I think it's safe to say that I'm lucky to be here to even write this story. I didn't sleep for 2 days following the event, and I still have nightmares almost daily about it. I'm always paranoid, and I openly carry a gun now. After my attack, I was forced to resign for safety reasons. Everyone statewide that works in max prisons now has vests, and none of the people from there talk to me anymore. I must say that I really feel abandoned. I have one guy from that facility that I still see, my sergeant who wasn't there that night. Court is coming soon to add 3 more attempted murders on this guy, and it turns out that he was a shot caller for the Crips gang. Anyway, stay safe out there, everyone, and if any law enforcement listens to this, always watch your 6 and never be afraid to ask for backup. In December of 2013, during my sophomore year of college, my at-the-time boyfriend, David, had a fraternity dinner banquet that I attended with him. It was a nice event, requiring everyone to dress up. He was in a suit, I was in dress and heels. It's important for later, so that's why I mention it. But we had a pretty good time, and then we went back to his place to drop off the award David won and change into tacky Christmas sweaters for a party that we had later that night. It was maybe 7:30, but given that it was December, it was already pretty dark out when we pulled into the parking lot outside of David's apartment. At his place, there was one road with parking on either side, spots against the building and spots against a fence that lined the edge of the complex property. We parked in a fence spot with the trunk of our car facing the building, directly across from the stair leading up to David's door. Maybe 30 feet from safety, I would guess. David and I got out, though, and we went to the trunk to get his award when a man started to approach us. Dave noticed him and said, "What's up, man?" The man said nothing and just kept walking towards us. As he got closer, I could see that he was wearing baggy black sweatpants and a camo hoodie. He had the hood on and the drawstrings were pulled tight, so I could only see about half of his face. Both of his hands were in the front of his hoodie pocket, though. David said again, "What's up?" This time, the man answered, "Get up against the car." Confused, I said, "Wait, what?" And the man pulled a gun out of his hoodie pocket. "I said, get up against the car!" David got against the back of the car while the man put the gun against his back. I was in utter shock that this was happening, so I took a step back, now trapped between 2 cars, a fence, and a man holding a gun to my boyfriend. He told David to give him all the money that we had. We both really only used cards and never had cash on us. Unfortunately, though, while home for Thanksgiving, his parents had given him $200 in 20s, all of which went into the hands of our mugger. Then he turned to me, pointed the gun at my face, less than a foot away, and said, "Your turn." I was dressed up and only carrying a small clutch purse. I literally only had a phone and lip gloss on me. I stammered out that I didn't have anything while staring at the gun he had pointed at me. He then went back to my boyfriend. At this point, I feel my blood start to boil. I was becoming less frightened and more pissed off, outraged that this man was aggressively stealing from 2 broke college kids. I mean, how dare he treat other people like this? Couldn't he tell that we were coming from an event and he was going to ruin our night? I wanted to kick him in the big clunky heel so badly, but thankfully I realized that that would probably just piss him off more. So instead, I grabbed my phone, keeping my hand in my purse, and tried to dial 911. Unfortunately, my purse was too small to hide any movement, and I was worried if he saw me trying to call for help that he would shoot. So in the end, I just kind of stood there, staring at the gun being pressed into David's back. Finally, he took David's wallet and car keys and threw them in one direction, ran off in the other, hopping the fence separating the apartment complex from a small neighborhood. David and I just kind of stood there in silence for a second, trying to grasp what just happened. We slowly gathered his keys and wallet and then went inside and called the police, definitely in shock. But this is where the story gets really interesting. So the police had an officer patrolling the other side of the apartment complex. It was a group of about 26 buildings. We were in 26 and the cop was over near one. And the police were there because they'd gotten a call from a previous day about the same guy mugging someone over there. The police and the detectives came over and took our story and asked us questions for about an hour. When they left, it was still relatively early, maybe like 9 p.m. We were still shaken up, but David and I decided that we'll still go to the tacky Christmas party that we planned on attending, thinking that it would help us take our mind off of this horrible encounter. Our friend was hosting a pre-game at his apartment in the building 3 of the same complex. Even though we decided not to drink that night, we head over after getting into our tacky sweaters. The pre-game got a little bit rowdy and we heard a loud knock on the door. We open it to see the person who lives next door to our friend. He said, "Hey guys, you might want to keep it down. I don't want anyone getting in trouble. I have the police and an investigator at my apartment right now because I was mugged out here last night. I heard 2 people got mugged tonight, so please be safe, yeah?" And David and I looked at each other, then back at him. "Oh, hi, actually, that was us. We're the 2 that were mugged tonight. It's nice to meet you, a fellow mugging victim." He laughed and shook our hands. The neighbor and David compared knives that they were now carrying as personal defense weapons before we went back to his place. Later on down the road, David and I had broken up, but the security at the complex was amped up. More lights were installed in the parking lot, and my girlfriend and I moved in. We had to park in the same set of spots where I was held at gunpoint. Probably a stupid way to face your fears, but we didn't have any issues while we lived there, thankfully. In the end, though, this guy that mugged us, apparently, was never caught. So, I've heard some stories recently about human trafficking, and it got me thinking about this experience that I had last summer. So I, 18, female, 17 at the time, went to the convenience store near my house to get a Slurpee at around 9 or 10 p.m. I was walking up to the doors and I noticed 3 middle-aged men standing near the doors just kind of talking. There was an older lady struggling to open the door to leave, so as I came in, I opened it for her. As I walked into the store, she stopped and said thank you and blah blah blah. But this is when it started to get really weird. So she asked me how old I was and what school I went to. Then she asked me where I lived. I replied with, "Oh, I live in this town." But she was insistent on knowing where my house was. I started to get creeped out, so I pretended to get a call from my boyfriend, which I didn't have, and answered like, "Oh, hey babe, I'm just at Circle K near my house and I'll be over in 15. After I answered the call, she hurried out of the store and went up to those 3 men that were standing by the entrance. I got my Slurpee and then I literally ran to my car. I looked out of my window and the 3 men and the old lady got into a vehicle. I unfortunately can't remember what the make was, and started driving in my direction. Well, I noped the hell out of that parking lot and I drove away. I drove a bit down the road and then I noticed that they were definitely following me. So I turned into the Walmart parking lot and they continued forward. I'm hoping that it was just a coincidence that they were going in the same direction that I was. The whole situation felt really off and really creepy. The fact that they followed me and only went past me after I stopped and they kind of knew that I knew that they were following really creeps me out.